So it carries on into the millennium, the scriptures teach, and that forms a lot of the drama that you find in my novel. And I've, if you buy it, you'll find it, otherwise you won't. But I've read, you know, there's only a handful of novels. This is a topic a lot of people don't want to touch, actually. And I'm afraid of getting sued by Google because the followers of the Antichrist, who's in my first novel, The End of Days, his name was Andre, and they're called androids. What is an android today? Cell phone technology. So I make plain in the foreword that I got it first. I had this name first. I didn't steal it from anybody else. But you know, this is the picture that the Scripture paints. But it was so wonderful writing that in Jerusalem and picturing in my mind's eye, and I've prayed a lot about it before, and I've been planning this novel for years. By the way, I wanted to bring it out much earlier. The Lord kept saying, no, it's not the time. I said, why, Lord? Why, Lord? Well, now I think I know why. Until about 2007, 2008, this country in particular, people were in a party mode. Economy was doing good, and there was the brief interlude of 2001 with the 9/11 attacks and one or two other things. But from the early 90s on, economy was basically expanding, and you know, people were just having a party. And I don't think it was time for people to think about these end-time events and the drama that's coming, and the upheaval that the Scriptures tell us will come in those last days. But over the past 3 or 4 years, you have to have your head way deep in the sand not to see that. I'm reminded of it. Some of you who've been down in South Florida will appreciate this. Every time I get to the beach, which isn't that often, I'm sorry to say, but every time I do, there's the Trump Tower. 28-story condo tower right on the beach in Fort Lauderdale. It's been there 3 or 4 years, sitting empty. It's empty. They've never opened it up. Nobody wants to buy in there. Nobody wants to be the first to go into this huge building unless everybody else is going to go in, because your condo fees would be enormous. So they've got a chain across the front of it. And the windows have been broken out on the bottom floors of this brand new, beautiful, you know, condo building that Donald Trump obviously was connected to. All these other plans for others have all been scrapped. They evacuated the Howard Johnson Hotel there. They were going to put a condo up there. It's just an evacuated Howard Johnson Hotel now. It's just an empty shell right on the beach. Not just, of course, the economy and those things, but everything that's going on in the Middle East, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and the upheavals in Afghanistan and Iran and all these things that are happening. So today, I think people realize something is really shaking. Something is really fundamentally shaking that we cannot ignore anymore. But the millennial reign is coming, and to be able to picture Jerusalem in that era, as I was sitting at my desk looking out over the view, was wonderful. And to be able to picture the Lord reigning on the earth and His followers restoring life. Today I was reading a chapter that talks about the Greek Isles coming back to life through the efforts of the saints governing with the Lord in that time. And to picture that was wonderful. And it was a marvelous thing to be able to step out during this last year of turmoil in my own life and in the world, and have that peace that came from projecting into the future when the Lord will return and will reign. And I believe it's very soon that He's coming back. But you know, I mentioned my father's funeral, and by the way, how many of you think God can speak to you in a sports bar? Well, I had stopped by a sports bar in a little hometown area where my dad grew up, a little town, to tell some of his friends that I knew would be there because they kind of lived there, that he was in the hospital, and to give them an update. And I was praying very much about the next weekend because I was due to fly down to Portland, Oregon and speak at a church there. Well, I knew my dad was nearing his end. I knew he didn't have long. The doctors said probably a couple weeks at most. The pastor wanted to know, am I coming or not? He wanted an answer by the middle of the week. I'm praying, Lord, should I carry on with this or cancel? Well, as I'm talking to some of his friends in this place, one of them says, oh, there's the 10-day weather forecast on the television. And I turned around and looked at it, and my eyes immediately went to the 9th and 10th days of this 10-day forecast. And the predicted high, now this is North Idaho, not Charlotte, up the northwest. The predicted highs were 19 for both days. Well, my dad, like Billy Graham, was born in the year 1919. And my eyes immediately went to that, and I felt the Lord spoke to me there in that place and said that he would go on those days. Well, it turned out the 9th day was his last full day on earth, and the 10th day in the morning he went. So it was great because I gave that word to all my family, only of whom a portion are believers. And so they knew this had actually happened. I wasn't making it up after the fact. And so I was able to give that testimony at his funeral. My dad was an attorney, and a lot of his friends were not Christians. And they got to hear this testimony. I know some of them are going, what? God speaks to you, and he speaks to you in Portugal. But he did, so that was wonderful. But the day of his funeral, I mentioned that he had served in World War II in Tunisia and Algeria. And the reason I did that is because that very day, the leader of Tunisia fled his country. He fled his country for Saudi Arabia. That would turn out to be the beginning of what the media dubbed the Arab Spring, what I and others call the Islamic revival, the Islamic Spring, not an Arab Spring, a Muslim fundamentalist revival. It's turned out to be sparked a month before by a young Tunisian man, 26 years old, who his goods were taken from him on his streetwears. He had a little shop there, and he said to his friends, I'm going to set myself on fire to protest this. He did. He doused himself with gasoline, set himself on fire, killed himself. He became an instant shaheed in Arabic, a martyr, with songs written about him and poems and media coverage of this. And that sparked off this huge revolution throughout the Middle East that has had and is still having profound consequences and effects to this very day. And of course quickly spread to Tunisia, is one of the smallest Arab countries, spread down the road a bit in North Africa to the largest Arab country, Egypt. And within weeks, Hosni Mubarak, a close friend of the United States, the man who's kept the peace with Israel for 30 years, coming into power after the death of Anwar Sadat by the hands of Muslim fundamentalists, he was ousted from power. Of course, spread to Libya, spread to Syria, spread to Yemen, to Bahrain, demonstrations in Jordan and Lebanon, Mauritania, Algeria. Pretty much the entire Arab Muslim world was and is being affected by this thing. And the media, of course, was calling it a good thing. It's a democratic revolution. Many said it was inspired by President Obama's speech in Cairo a couple years earlier, where he called upon the Arab regimes to loosen their oppressive rule. And I'll just put it aside here, they're all dictatorships to one degree or another. Some are very benevolent, some are slightly benevolent, some are less so, and some are police states like Libya, and certainly Syria is very brutal and repressive, but none of them are true Western-style democracies. The president was encouraging that, and President Bush beforehand had encouraged that as well, and that's one of the reasons given for going into Iraq and ousting Saddam Hussein. Well, when we did that in 2003, some of you know this, I wrote an editorial for World Net Daily website, and I said Saddam is definitely worthy of being overthrown. The guy is, again, a dictator, a brutal, awful man. But let's be careful here, because who's going to replace him? And, you know, are we really going to bring Western-style democracy to this Arab Muslim country that's divided between Sunnis and Shiite Muslims, with Iran on one side and Syria to the north and west, and you know, all this? Is that really possible? And I pointed out that Algeria tried in 1991 to hold free and fair Western-style democratic elections. The army said, we're going to step back from our rule, and we're going to let you people vote, and whoever wins, wins. Well, a bunch of parties were formed, and the first round of the two-round vote was held, and who won it? A Muslim fundamentalist party, called the FIS, that's their acronym. And what was their platform? We're going to run in elections, win the elections, then ban elections, and bring in Sharia, Islamic fundamentalist law. So they're